just can't wait for the ball to start tumbling in the air. Herbie?
I think what we'll do is I'll ask each of the three analysts like just one overall question, and then we can take questions from anyone who has questions for them. For Kirk, the strength of schedule is often used in the debate on the best team. So, in a twist on that, which of these two teams have played a schedule that you think could best prepare them for the game against this opponent?
Well, if you compare what Alabama's had to go through playing in the SEC and compare that to what Texas has gone through, I don't think there's any comparison. I mean, Alabama's had a much tougher road to get here, even their last game playing against Florida and dominating the way they did. But I just don't believe that it necessarily gives excuse me, an advantage to Alabama just because they have had that tougher road. I think Texas has had, you could probably argue, two tough games, both Oklahoma and Nebraska, against two great defenses. And I think that the fact they've survived those two games gives them some confidence coming into this game to think that, if they can get through those two defensive lines especially, that they have what it takes to be able to be productive. But I don't think necessarily that the strength of schedule, because it favors Alabama, necessarily favors them in the game.
And for Coach Gruden, you've coached in the Super Bowl, which is the biggest game in the NFL, and this is the biggest game in college football. So what from your perspective, what are these two coaches doing to prepare for this game and to keep their players focused on the task at hand?
Well, I think it's a bigger challenge for these guys because these are younger players, and they might have a little bit more distraction because of their youth. Plus, they've had longer to prepare. We had a week before our Super Bowl game, and I think when you have 14 to 16 practices, sometimes you can overkill your preparation, but I do think they've taken advantage of their preparation, knowing Mac Brown and Nick Saban, and I'm sure they've developed some of their young players. But knowing these two coaches and these two programs, the success that they've not only had this year but have sustained over a long period, I think you're going to see the best of the Longhorns and the best of the Crimson Tide.
All right, and for Todd, you and Kirk are the only two analysts that have actually worked games involving both of these teams. So someone who's seen both teams in person, and what are the keys for each team to lead the victory?
Well, the teams are very similar in a lot of ways, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. I think that the fact that Will Muschamp and Nick Saban have such a long relationship, their styles are very similar. I would say both teams have an SEC-style defense. Obviously, Alabama, and I think Texas has the same kind. As far as keys, obviously for Texas, they're going to have to protect their quarterback, and they're going to have to do a good job of stopping the run and defending the run of Alabama and try to put the game into the hands of Greg McElroy in the passing game. And with Alabama, they're going to have to take care of the football, which they've done. Only 10 turnovers all year. It's a very opportunistic Texas defense. And I think that they're going to have to play well in space. They're not used to playing as many spread teams in the SEC as they see in the Big 12 week in and week out. They've got to tackle well in space, and whenever you have a long layoff like you do for a bowl game, tackling is always an issue. And so I think that'll be the key thing for Alabama: playing in space, tackling in space, and this will be the best quarterback that they've faced all season in Colt McCoy.
All right, we'll do if anyone has questions. Otherwise, we could do one-on-ones with each of the people, and then, like I said, after this is done up here, anyone who wants to come over and see a 3D demo of what next year's national championship game would look like in 3D, that'll be available as well.
I just had one question. This is for Brent and for Kirk. Obviously, we're not going to get a chance to talk to you guys after the game. In your opinion, if Texas wins this game, are they the team of the decade? I know that's going to be a discussion after the game. If Texas wins, just Brent and Kirk, your thoughts. Do you think Texas is the team of the decade?
Honestly, I'd be perfectly honest, I haven't given it a whole lot of thought. I always think in terms of a season. I've got difficulty thinking back with a decade. We've had right here in Los Angeles, of course, Herbie and I have done a lot of good USC games, and certainly that team until this year had to be in any kind of an argument. Alabama, I've thought coming into this game that Nick Saban might have been a year ahead of schedule when you think of the great progress that he's made down there, and you can't look past what Tim Tebow and Urban Meyer have accomplished down in Florida. So I would be, and I would think the Longhorns would think the same way, that they would be very satisfied in being called the team of the year and let it go at that. Talk radio won't have much to discuss now that one is playing. Two, they can't go back on the play. Maybe they can discuss if we keep those rascals working for a month or so. Yeah, well, let's bring in Herbie because he thinks more. He's younger. He can think back further than I can. Herbie.
I agree. I think USC is the team of the decade. I know they've had a little bump this year. You go back to 2002 and whatever it was, seven, I think, straight Pac-10 championships. Seems like every year they were in a Rose Bowl. It started in the Orange Bowl. And I think regardless of what happened this year, in my opinion, they're still the team of the decade. Florida was battling there, and if they would have been here, then you could make a case for them. But with that being said, I think there's nobody that's undervalued more than Texas. I don't know if it's because of the way Mac Brown goes about his business, the gentleman that he is, and the way he's kind of low key with his personality. I think that Texas is a team that every year wins 10 or 11 games and plays in big bowl games and wins big games. And it just seems like 5 years ago, we were sitting up answering questions about why can't Mac Brown win big games. And then he had the breakthrough year in 2005 when he knocked off OU, beat USC in the national title, and now is dominating Oklahoma, winning every bowl game. All of that is water under the bridge. So they definitely are in the discussion, but in my opinion, for what it's worth, I definitely would say SC is the team of the decade, in my opinion.
Anyone else?
I would ask for Kirk or Brent, whoever wants it. Matt's now got 7 wins in his last 8 bowl games. What, in your mind, changed? I mean, you got better players. What changed?
It's funny. He told a story to us about how they weren't dominating necessarily in the postseason, and about 7 years ago they did a study. And he shared this with you guys, but he talked with Barry Alvarez at Wisconsin, and Barry was coming off 3 Rose Bowl wins. He talked with Florida State and Bobby Bowden, and Bobby Bowden seemed like every year he was winning a bowl game. And they actually went to Madison and to Tallahassee and visited with them in the offseason to talk about what is it that you implement during that 30 or 40-day layoff, however long it is for you. And he's kind of used what he learned from his research to help generate some excitement in their law during that layoff. And from what he shared with us, it's taking the time in Austin to kind of go back to have a preseason camp or kind of a spring football mentality where they're pounding on each other, being very physical, working on the fundamentals of the game, giving them the time off for the holiday, getting back together wherever the site happens to be and start to put together the game plan and then treat that week like it's a game week during the regular season. And just and it's a great question because there's really a fine balance between working them too hard and not working hard enough because you want the fundamentals, but you also want fresh legs. And right now you got to give Mac a lot of credit for being able to find that.
If you go back, and this is back to the NFL days of the Super Bowl. It was interesting. I'd forgotten that John only had a week to get ready. Most of the time, they've had 2 weeks. And the first coach that I was ever around who did what Herbie is talking about, installed the game plan the first week back home. That was John Madden when he brought the Raiders down and won the Super Bowl. And then he told them on that second week, we'll fine-tune it, we'll go through the distractions, we'll meet with the media, and go from there. And so the Mac Brown has picked up that principle, has been passed along. And I think in John's case, he would tell you the same thing. If he'd had 2 weeks, that first week back in Tampa, John, wouldn't you have put most of the heavy lifting in back home and then come here and just fine-tuned it the second week?
I was one of those guys that lifted heavy all the time. I'm no longer in coaching, but
you will be back.
The preparation part of it, I have to give Mac Brown credit for going places and researching how to win the big game, and the confidence that they obviously have at Texas, knowing that they're going to be in that position year in and year out. But let's be honest, the Longhorns, it's like watching an all-star team. They've got great players, and they're playing their best football in recent years under Mac Brown.
Two questions. The first one, you guys alluded to it, the David versus Goliath thing. I'm interested where that came from. I heard it a couple of weeks ago, and it seemed to come from some of the national media members. And then also, to the long layoff between the SEC championship, between your conference championship and this game. Your thoughts on that? Is there anything that can be done about that? Because that's particularly challenging for both of these coaches and programs.
The guys on the end can talk about the long layoff and a playoff or any of that. I don't ever see that changing personally. But I don't think the national media necessarily made this a David versus Goliath thing. I think it is natural when one team ends the year, even in a championship year, with a last-second field goal, amidst controversy with that last second, the play, the clock, Nebraska coming out in the field, a lot of people reacting to, boy, they were very fortunate to be able to win that game. You know, are they even deserving of being? Every year we sit here at the championship game, one team comes in flying high and the other team just got in. And I don't think it's as bad as it normally is this time around. I think Texas, I think most people agree, is a very talented team and doesn't have to apologize to Boise State or TCU or Cincinnati for being here. In fact, they got through the Big 12. It is what it is. But Alabama, because of the way they played against Tebow in Florida, they come in with a little bit of momentum. So I think from a national perspective, I would agree that people look at Alabama as the team to beat. But I don't think it's the same David versus Goliath matchup that maybe we've had in the past in BCS championship games. Yeah, I think we all kind of get it. The SEC is the best conference. But I do sense, just from a fan's perspective, once you get outside of that region, it is the SEC versus the world. I mean, the world in college football feels that the SEC spends a lot of time almost with an inferiority complex. Like, if you say something as a writer positive about a Pac-10 team, or if you happen to dare to say that, boy, the Big Ten did a nice job this year in the postseason, what do you mean? The SEC is quick to say, well, they're not as good as we are. And so I do think that you get that from fans outside of the SEC, but I think that nobody has the collective passion in any region the way the SEC sticks by their conference. Like, if Alabama wins, fans at even Auburn and LSU, and they're all claiming the title. I mean, it's the SEC's title. It's not just Alabama's title. And I think outside of that region, Todd, I think there's definitely a kind of an us against the world mentality.
Yeah, the majority of my games were in the SEC this year. And I'll say this, I've been in the SEC primarily for the last 10 years. And quite frankly, this year, although I do think the conference is still extremely strong, outside of Florida and Alabama, the conference was a little bit down, in my opinion, because the other teams were not as good as they have been in the last few years. So, but those top two teams were so good that it carried the conference this year more than in other years. But I agree. I think that, the thing that separates, as I've watched the SEC over the last 10 years, everybody talks about speed. Well, there's speed all over the country. But where you really see it from top to bottom in that league that you don't see top to bottom in any other league is speed in the defensive line, particularly in the interior defensive line positions. From top to bottom in that league is what separates the SEC from the rest of the conferences in college football. And that's why the defenses carry the day in the SEC. I mean, from top to bottom, they all play great defense. Actually, quite honestly, the best meal I had was at the Salt Lick Barbecue when I was down and doing the Texas game. That was best by far.
All right, we'll. I think Dave had one more thing he wanted to add about the studio component, and then we'll take one-on-ones for these guys.
In addition to the game coverage, we'll also have our host unit out here, which is our studio. Kirk and his whole crew, the game day crew, is out here. You saw them last week prior to the Rose Bowl. We'll be on ESPN tomorrow night with game day. We've got, as you've probably seen on the air, plenty of live hits for SportsCenter, and College Football Live is out here as well. So we've got 15 talent running around covering all the stories, the teams, and everything going on. So we pretty much got everything blanketed. We're also adding Pete Carroll to our coverage. Pete will join us today for SportsCenter, and it'll be on tomorrow on game day and in the pregame show and halftime and postgame as well. So 9 more cameras utilized for our host sets. There's 2 host sets. The primary set, again, utilized for game day and pre-half post, but also a side set, secondary set for other shows as well.
All right, we'll do one-on-ones.